expectations around the pace of change are much different than I've ever experienced. And so how do we go from this chapter to what may be next?
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of SBJ's On Stage. I'm your host, Taylor Bloom, and I'm excited to bring you this conversation with SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. This conversation took place on April 22nd at the CAA World Congress of Sports, presented by Sports Business Journal. This episode features Sankey in a candid interview with Sports Business Journal's Rachel Axon. They explore everything from the future of the college football playoff and the impact of NIL on recruiting and economics, to how the SEC is navigating realignment and shaping the next chapter of college sports. It's an inside look at one of the most powerful voices in the game and the decisions that may shape college sports for years to come. Let's go on stage.
Greg, appreciate you being here. Just before we were come up here, my colleague Ben Portnoy was texting me about, Arkansas's AD saying that they will allow them to enforce, basically player contracts. You've seen the situation at Tennessee. How difficult has it been for your schools to operate in this environment where there's varying NIL laws, different, basically lack of enforcement? How hard has that been, and what does House give you?
They're probably better at drilling down to what that means. But you can go back to December. There was a dispute, I think still is a dispute, about a young man who signed something with Wisconsin, went to Miami. And so you're seeing now over and over the issues of contract law that are on full display. Now, what are the second and third order effects? Legal minds can debate that. And I think one of our realities now is anybody with a law degree and a Twitter account is like an expert, right? So they put something out and I'll have a university president send it to me. Doesn't mean it's right. It's an opinion. So you go back and you're going to deal with issues around agreements that are signed. Are they enforceable in this environment? Are they enforceable under the law? And that's to be determined.
Yeah. We heard in the discussion this morning, Sarah Hirschland and Candace Story-Lee were talking about the settlement, and this is phase one, this is step one. So assuming approval, what clarity, what stability does that give you? And then how does that propel you into step two of national legislation?
I've said before, and I'll say today, what we're experiencing is a chapter. So it's not the end of the story. It is a chapter. It's a necessary chapter. And one of the realities around other ideas related to college sports is they have started at a point ignoring what we have to deal with from the past. So we can go to confessional and say, we're slow to change. We should have done this, we should have done that. But I also think if you look at the reality now, so let's just take basketball, the opining about the lack of Cinderellas in March Madness. And hey, we had a great basketball season, a historic basketball season, so no apologies there. The defense around a product that was denied, basically, actually is the center of the debate right now is, well, how do you manage through this system? How do you make decisions? Will Cinderella ever have the opportunity in the NCAA basketball tournament? Will a small college jump up on the big stage and have a moment in baseball or in softball? Those things have happened over time. And so I think the coping that you hear is we're trying to figure out what we have to deal with from our past. That's the chapter we're in right now. Expectations around the pace of change are much different than I've ever experienced. And so how do we go from this chapter to what may be next? And I think what will be next is the ability to make the settlement terms work. And what we've lost is, in a way, the social contract. So the comment earlier this morning that this is the least regulated space. Well, there are reasons for that. There are the plaintiffs' lawyers that have brought lawsuits. There are state attorneys general who brought lawsuits. There are legislatures who've enacted laws that say you can't regulate this particular area. The NCAA can't regulate that. And even some of those would say, if we come up with a common sense set of rules at the conference level, where our 16 members agree that we couldn't enforce those rules. So this chaotic system is not like well, somebody wasn't paying attention. That's way too simple a definition. It is the layering of complexities of large state universities, 50 different states, the enactment of legislation, the change in pursuit of antitrust law, and we can go right here. Lawsuits over eligibility. What was a collegiate experience, there's one lawsuit now that would remove the 5-year rule from administration. I think that's in a New Jersey court. So you compile all of that together, and you go back to the observation that people are desperate for clarity and desperate for understanding how do you manage. And the solutions identified, you could go to collective bargaining, but it then doesn't negate some of these regulatory limits that states have enacted on an individual basis. So it is a national issue. It is a national need in a time when not a lot happens, at least around what I might hope at the congressional level.
Well, to stay on the congressional level, between the power conferences and the NCAA itself, you've spent close to $10 million in the last handful of years lobbying Congress, pushing here. To what extent has that been productive, and can it be soon, right? Congress can't agree on whether the sun is out, and we want legislation at this point.
No, I've told the story in the hallway. I was there a couple weeks ago, and I left one senator's office, and the Dow was down 600 points. I went 2 doors down to another senator's office, and it was up 2,000 points. And that's the chaotic situation that they're dealing with. I was in leadership's office when one side's calling the other side because of a budget vote, and it makes the issues we have seem small. Yet this is a uniquely American reality, college sports. And so let's disaggregate for just a moment. So $10 million, that's a number, right? And so you can combine conferences over 5 years, 6 years we've had a GR relationship. Is that going to get into the 7 figures? Well, if you hire somebody good, absolutely. And I'm pretty unapologetic about that, because when I started as commissioner, I wanted to start the GR relationship then, because we didn't have a need, and you have to work through the relationships so that when you have the need. All of that said, I think there's a proximity between the sides, if you will, at a time when there's not a lot of public cross-pollination between both sides of the aisle, but I think there's a lot of respectful work that's done. How do you get to the finish line is the puzzling piece for me. Like, can we resolve some key differences? Where do we in college athletics have to compromise? Where do each side of the aisle have to come to the table a little bit and compromise? And can that provide a more suitable national framework? Because you don't have Final Fours, you don't have the College World Series, you don't have the college football playoff without a set of national standards. And what I described earlier is we have lost national standards and the ability to have national standards in college sports.
Is there are you sensing an urgency, with House coming down the pike? Do you see a difference in the approach?
I think the word urgent is a difficult word in my conversations. Is there an urgency on the part of our campuses and my constituencies? Sure. But when you have the experience of the 2,600 point swing in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, you're trying to go through budget reconciliation, you're dealing with the various issues, urgency takes on a different understanding.
Fair enough. When you're talking about a national standard, from your vantage point, what does that need? What does that need to include? There's various aspects about antitrust.
The basics are you do need state preemption. Otherwise, the states just legislate, and you have a different set of rules. And you have to understand, this is not, in my view, a hypothetical. At some point, we essentially take colleges and make them high school championships on a state-by-state basis. If every state wants to wall itself off from every other state's collegiate competition, then we have essentially state high school championships just played at the college level. Now, that may be the theater of the absurd to explain. So I would start there, state preemption, so that we can have national standards. Now you're into the liability issue. I've never asked for an antitrust protection. I've had members of the Democrat Party ask me about that. And I'm like, I'll have that conversation with you, but I don't think you're prepared to have it with me, because that's cost structures. What you need is a level of liability protection so that you're not sued constantly for things like these basic collegiate eligibility policies. Like that's one where 10 years ago I never would have envisioned the uncapping of the collegiate experience time. And let me just contextualize that. There are 5 players on a basketball floor, right? I don't think anybody's moving to 7. I didn't hear that from Adam Silver today. There are 9 baseball players on a diamond. Now you've got DHs and relief pitchers, but there are 9. I didn't hear Rob say we're going to 12.
Right.
We're at 9. When you expand the cohort of participants, experience, skill, mastery of the activity matters in a different way. So if you're a coach, you want that group on your roster. And what that does is limit the entry point for the young people. And the collegiate experience is come in as an adolescent, progress through 4 or 5 years, leave as an adult with an education, with playing experience, maybe a future sports opportunity, but certainly the basis for a career opportunity. With all that's happening, that experience is going away. So when people talk about let's just professionalize college sports, there needs to be care in that language. Because that means high school seniors that aspire to be part of a collegiate experience and be educated don't have that same opportunity that has existed before and before. And there's a lot of content within the settlement about roster limits, plenty of objections about that. I would argue the much bigger threat is you expand the cohort of eligible student athletes and you limit the entry point for a lot of people. So when I start describing that, we need the ability to enact that kind of common sense rule without being in court all the time. And I think that socially people would say that's the right thing for college sports to do, is move people through that progression. Now, how you define NIL, codifying settlement terms, I think that could be a healthy part of the legislation as well. And then you're into debating what assurances and what oversight should be provided. I would offer scholarship certainty. I would offer that we actually provide medical care better than 99% of the general public experiences now. If that has to be codified somehow, I'll be happy to be in that conversation. We, without needing federal legislation, provide post-eligibility medical care. And one of the things that the NCAA and Charlie Baker did was enact for all 3 divisions a post-eligibility medical insurance plan that went into effect last year. There's so much healthy about college athletics that you don't need to over-regulate, but you do need the ability to have national standards again.
Well, when you talk about national standards and codifying some of what's in-house, obviously Deloitte will have the clearinghouse, and I know you're in the process of figuring that out. How, in your mind, does that transition work? And can that be, I guess, more effective than the somewhat free-for-all that we're in right now in that space?
Well, we're talking about oversight of third-party name, image, and likeness activity. So if we went back and you were interviewing me in, let's say, 2017, we would have a common understanding of what third-party name, image, and likeness activity. It's real business purpose, things are being done, it makes sense economically for the business to generate opportunities for itself with that young person. And we've just migrated away quickly. Because we can't regulate. You're going to be sued by a state, you're going to be pursued within that state. And so now we're to this kind of open definition. So part of what would be an outcome is the ability to oversee with that clearinghouse third-party NIL activity for range of compensation and real business purpose. That's sensible. That's not taking away opportunities. That's supporting healthy opportunities, right? So you have to have the settlement to make that possible. And then there'll be a bunch of noise. And part of the challenge is there's really not a model that exists for that, like in the professional world. Because I can walk down the grocery store aisle in Skaneateles, New York at Top Supermarket, and Josh Allen has a breakfast cereal for sale, right? That's pretty cool. Doesn't have any logos, doesn't have any marks, but that's name, image, and likeness activity. If some young college person wants to market a breakfast cereal, knock yourself out. That's what it was supposed to be, and we've lost sight of that reality.
You're talking to a Bills fan, so extra
I
points
knew
for
that
the
from our conversation.
for the Josh Allen
I did
reference.
not unintentionally drop the Josh Allen thing. CAA client too, as I recall.
Yes.
We just need a better defense next year.
Greg, tell me about it. Story of my life. Sorry about that. If we don't have federal legislation July 1, right? We're in this sort of interregnum period. How do you, as a conference, is it looking at your member schools to be leaning on their state AGs, their state legislatures to, hey, let's just not every man out for themselves here? I mean, how do you operate in that environment absent something from Congress?
The not long answer, but the brief answer is I identified to our membership what we were losing several years ago is shared values, right? So I can put people in a room and we can all agree we want regulation, we want oversight. And then when they leave the room, things happen.
They want to win.
Yeah, that pressure becomes there. And so what our presidents have said is we want a membership agreement which says we're going to follow this structure, and if we don't, here are the outcomes. And again, if we're using professional sports, they all have charters or franchise agreements that inform we're going to follow the outcomes, whether it's the commissioner who makes a decision or a board or an arbitrator, we're going to follow those decisions, and we're going to do our best to follow the rules. That's where we have to head. And if there's no federal legislation, I look at it that we're preparing without federal legislation while still working on that component.
Can you do that, or is that opening the door, kind of like what you said, like we can't set and enforce our rules on a conference level? You expect challenges to that, or?
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah.
But when we talk about leadership, that leadership has to come together. I mean, part of the reality of leading a college sports conference is we now have 16. You're trying to draw 16 people into a solution. And we want a competitive environment. You don't want the Harlem Globetrotters and what was it, the Washington Generals? Was that what it was back in the day? That's not any good.
Yeah.
That's another one of those absurdities beyond just my state high school college championship analogy that nobody wants. And so I think people are motivated to have a competitive system. But again, there's not one switch that's flipped and solves all those problems. There are a layer of complexities here that have to be considered in the solution. And even the notion that's been presented, and I have my views of this, a super league that takes things down to 50 or to 30, there's a reason the professional leagues are like 30 and 32 because you can fund those. They're not 70. We're at 360 in Division I. And just simply walking away from Division I, which people will ask me about and encourage to happen, creates another set of social upheavals that then puts you back in congressional hearings where you're not solving problems, you're just responding to questions that are going to be difficult to answer, because America, as part of this context, expects Hoosiers to play out every March. They want Normandale on the sideline. They want the upset. And that's why you saw so much commentary about all the one seeds advance to the Final Four. And is that good for college basketball? It's good for the SEC.
I know, you're very, very happy coming out of March.
Which makes it good for college basketball. But that's like the next time they bring you back for an interview.
Yeah. You talk about the concept of a super league and coming from covering the Olympics full time. This is, as Sarah talked about earlier this morning, pretty existential, right? That in the shakeup of college sports, if we're just funneling more and more resources into two programs, what happens to the non-rev Olympic sports? I'll add Title IX compliance. This is already a challenge, I think, on most campuses and stands to be even more out of whack. So how are you working with the schools within the SEC to consider those things that, okay, as we're figuring this out, let's not, bull in the china shop, break other things that are unique to our system?
That's hard because there are so many variables in the system and so many expectations. Not that anybody listens to my football media day speeches, but I think probably in 2019, the line was, when you change the economics of college sports, you alter the Olympic development program in this country. I mean, part of the congressional conversation is that recognition. Now, from our membership, you have a $20.5 million outflow for revenue sharing. You also have pressure around third-party NIL opportunities. That's essentially a budget reallocation. So we do look at growing revenue, but you have to deal with that immediacy. Now on the good side, so this isn't like a half-empty conversation. One of the untold stories in most of the Olympic programs that we support, so you think particularly about track and field, swimming and diving, those were partial scholarship sports. Yeah. So as an outcome of the settlement, those could be full scholarships in the future. So young people aren't having to take out student loans while they're competing for track and field and potentially become future Olympians. So there's assets created, the way the roster structures are presented, the ability to comply with the fundamentals of Title IX about participation opportunities remain, and institutions can make decisions. One of the factors that is real is the female to male enrollment ratio is, you're at 60-40 in a lot of places. That's not universal, but that has an impact as well. And our commitment is to continue to sponsor a breadth of sports. Now, we have to have certainty. You have to have cost structures. And if what's happening now just continues for years and years, you will quickly see a diminishment on the number of sports offered. That's why there needs to be a structure. That's why there needs to be national standards, because its impacts are geopolitical.
You talk about, the revenue sharing, and I expect most schools are going to go there, but the scholarship opportunity, what realistically do you expect schools to do? That just because they can offer, up to whatever number of scholarships in those sports doesn't mean they will. How do you expect them to handle that as they're navigating new financial realities with revenue sharing?
I think that's one of those fundamental commitments that most of our programs will commit to support. I think that can be a healthy opportunity. You look at our sports, everybody wants to be successful against their 15 colleagues in the SEC, and that's baseball, softball. Track and field has great meaning. We have an incredible history there. And they're going to have to make decisions. But the ability to support those scholarships is one that I know our campuses are pursuing.
Well, it's something I'll be keeping an eye on there. To pivot a little bit away from House and the changes coming there, you are here and not yet at CFP meetings. What are you expecting? What are the objectives and priorities that you have going into those discussions?
Well, the college football playoffs meeting today, so whatever chaos ensues, I'm going to blame on being with you for lunch. I just wasn't there for the conversation. So you can read Ross Dellinger's tweets. When I say that, you'll know that I told you. Here's how it would go. I think the first thing that needs to happen, there's all kinds of administrative stuff, is we need to go to a true seeding for the 12-team bracket after this season. So last year was a model developed in 2019, 2020, when the Pac-12 existed in its old fashion. And so having the 4 top seeds being the top 4 conference champions getting a bye made sense when Oregon was in the Pac-12, when Texas was in the Big 12. Now they're in 2 conferences, so the 2 conferences had top 4 seeds. So I would start there. And then we have to figure out a format for 26. I think 12 could stay, 14's on the table. I don't think that's been a secret. So there are 3 pieces. How many teams? How are the teams determined to be in the bracket? And then how are they placed? So I think the first and the third are easy. Like, how do you place them based on rankings and how many teams? Is it 12 or is it 14? The middle one is the hard one. That's where it gets messy, right? And we have concerns about the announcement that Tennessee lost a football game with Nebraska, and part of the representation was, well, the CFP selection committee said to the Nebraska AD, some members or former members, it won't hurt you in the selection process. Of anything that threatens college football scheduling, that statement is at the top of my list. Why would you play tough games if it's more important not to lose games than it is to win games? And in my athletics director's room, the observation is it doesn't seem you're rewarded for winning big games compared to the hurt you take for losing a big game. And so we've got a lot of work to do on that middle part. I don't expect to solve it. I think there'll be plenty of noise out of this meeting about, well, they want automatic bids, they want allocations. You know what? Everybody in the system has an allocation except the SEC in the Big Ten. So last year, teams that were not ranked in the top 12 got moved in. Teams that were not ranked in the top 4 got moved into buys. And so I think that the conversation about allocating access has been introduced by others. Now, how are we going to engage in that conversation? That's what you need to pay attention to. Other than me saying, I'm sorry, I missed that. I was speaking at a lunch gathering.
Is that something you're in favor of? The talk has been
I've been
4 for 2 for you and 2 for the Big Ten. Is that something you're in favor of?
I've been clearly in favor of, let's just take the top 4, 8, 12, 14 teams.
In the rank.
Forget this allocation, forget this conference champions. But we reached a political compromise. And so we're going to have to work through some ideas and compromises. And again, there's a lot of allocations within the system. None of those favor me. Like, it's tough to say to Tennessee, why didn't you get a home game last year? Well, because we allocate some teams like Arizona State and Clemson that could move potentially forward. Boise State moved forward. That's a tough one to answer. For Texas, why was I 5 and not 3? 5 years ago, it made sense. We're in a system, though, to make change this year, we have to have 11 entities agree. And having been through the CFP structure, that's hard to do. Starting with the 26th season, it's a different decision-making format. There's no unanimity, and then there's some decision-making authority granted to the Big Ten and SEC after a collaborative process. So we have to work through the collaborative process.
So messy middle.
Messy middle.
Sort of all around. To take a more 30,000-foot view, when you look at the future of college sports, the changes that are on the horizon, what has you concerned about some of the direction? What has you optimistic about some of the direction of where things are going?
Well, I'll start with optimism. I look at what our men's basketball season was, not just from success in a national championship, but look at our venues. Look at the intensity, the attendance, night after night after night. And look at, hey, okay, so we're in a transfer portal, right? Let's be unapologetic for a moment and say, if you want to come play someplace, you want to play in those environments under the coaches we have that have all been to the NCAA tournament. Now 7 have been to the Final Four. I'm really optimistic. Our baseball, our baseball attendance pretty much universally is pretty remarkable. Our softball games I was watching on TV, the 3 that we had on TV over the weekend were all full. Like we could bring more people in. We just have to figure out where you put them. I'm concerned that people don't want to solve problems. And that means within college athletics themselves that, well, okay, we can complain about the chaos, but maybe the chaos suits my needs better than a set of solutions and a regulatory approach. I'm concerned at the top of my list is young people aren't receiving meaningful educations. So this is where I sound like the get off my lawn guy. That experience I shared about a high school senior not having the opportunity to come in like they would have 10 years ago because there are more people in the system and they don't have playing time. They don't have that experience. That drives people away, in my opinion. I have no research to back that up. It doesn't draw them in. And so the transformational experience for me, I transferred twice. I played college baseball. I played junior college basketball. It took me 5 years to graduate, but it changed my trajectory. Why would we want to limit that? Why wouldn't we build those opportunities? And why wouldn't we recognize that there are elements of the system that needed to be thrown out because they're outdated? We're never going back. I'm not using the A word, which is amateurism. I haven't used that in a long time. But there were elements, there were priorities there were principles that informed the opportunities for young people, whether it's the Olympic movement that Sarah talked about, whether it's the ability to share revenue in an equitable way, or whether it's to provide opportunities for people to come in, be built, and then be launched, not simply stay around.
You've been at the SEC now as commissioner for 10, this will be your 10th?
Yeah, end of my 10th.
Yeah.
I can make it one more month. Have my 10th anniversary celebration.
How has that role changed, right? Like obviously the landscape vastly different today, the issues we're talking about, the changes on the horizon. How's that changed how and where you're spending your time?
I went through a Deloitte CEO transition program. It was really good since they're sponsoring like a break or something. I'll give them a shout out. And that was in 2015, and I wrote up what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, where I needed to spend my time. And I was pretty close, like I batted 600 if we want to use the baseball analogy, so I got 60% of my predictions right. But it was an incredibly hard 3-session process to think through how I needed to change from the chief operating officer to the commissioner. Everything that I would have thought of changed during the COVID year. So 5 years in, COVID kept me with a full-time job and then added a full-time job on top of it, trying to manage through COVID. And it's never reset. So the pace that was intense from 2015 to 2020 was more intense through 2021 and has never gone back.
Yeah.
So that's one. The second is I delegate more and I do less in the competitive experiences. Okay. My staff does, and more trying to figure out how to navigate these uncharted waters. And that's called leadership. And leadership's going to make mistakes. Leadership's going to get it right. Leadership's going to have to say where you were wrong. Leadership's going to have to say, here's our vision for the future. And then when people kick you in the shins, you're going to have to tell them why they're wrong, or you're going to have to think about why you have to adjust. That's the reality right now.
Well, certainly the reality amid very changing time in the industry and in college sports. We appreciate your insights.
Can I say something?
And
I've
being here.
spoken at lunches before. I have never heard lower like china clattering and silverware
eating.
knocking. Like, so you're all hungry now. You should go ahead and eat.
Yeah, excellent. Well,
Okay.
thank you, Greg.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of On Stage by Sports Business Journal. If you enjoyed this exclusive conversation with one of the most powerful voices in sports, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with colleagues or anyone who wants an unfiltered look at the decisions and strategies shaping the business of sports. And here's a closing thought starter for you. As you think about what's next for college sports, how is your organization preparing for the impact of NIL, realignment, and evolving governance models? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please shoot me an email at tbloom@sportsbusinessjournal.com. We'll be back next week with another exclusive conversation from a leader shaping the future of sports. Until next time, stay tuned and stay ahead. This is On Stage.